right, Lone Star Gunners, welcome to the podcast. This is Lone Star Gun Talk, the official podcast of Lone Star Gun Rights, and I am your humble host, as always, Derek Wills. Thank you so much for joining me today. We have a special guest with us, and that is Dwayne Stovall. Dwayne has been courteous enough to give us some of his invaluable time to join us today and talk a little bit about his run against John Cornyn for U.S. Senate. Dwayne, thank you so much for your time. Thank you for being here, sir.
Hey, it's my pleasure.
So in case somebody doesn't know, tell us a little bit about who you are, your background, and why you're running for U.S. Senate.
Wow, how much time you got?
I got all the time in the world for you, my friend.
Okay, well, simply put, I'm just an every Texan. I'm 54 years old, been married nearly 30 years, going on 29 years. I've got 3 children. Been in business for almost 25 years. But we own a business called Diamond K Equipment. We do a lot of site work and dirt work with it. We built bridges for the highway department for almost 15 years for that company, and got out of building bridges after stimulus, the stimulus years, 2008, 9, and 10. For those that are old enough to remember that, that was a really wonderful period in governmental involvement. We started another company back in 2011 called Liberty Testing. We do compliance work on the pipelines here in Texas. And the course of me getting to the point in my life where I would run for U.S. Senate started about 15 years ago. For those that don't know, I ran for U.S. Senate in 2014. I pulled about almost 11% of the primary on just $70,000, which to me is just a regular every Texan. I woke up the day after the primary thinking that was just a loss, but apparently that was a bit of it should have never happened in a state as large as Texas. To pull double digits in a Republican primary was kind of unheard of for an absolute no-no. Rang for 2 weeks solid after that primary, asking me who I was and what I brought to the table, and I was at least contrary enough not to offer up a lot of information to the people that called afterwards. Some of them, it was really interesting, broad range of people who were really well connected to some big candidates, campaign managers for some big national candidates, and then all the way down to like think tanks in Washington, D.C. that monitored the race and just wanted to know something about me. It was a really kind of an interesting science to look at. My personal pathway to getting in that race started about 15 years ago when I started reading the source documents to what created the Constitution, what the states agreed to originally in the Revolutionary period. Now, I have to understand, I'm kind of studying this as a guy whose family's been in Texas almost 200 years. And we here in Texas know that we have a very distinct history of our own revolution, our own constitutional creation, our own governmental creation, and that period of the Republic, which is a standalone kind of identity that I'm very concerned about losing. That being said, my own self-study into the origins of the United States led me very quickly to realize that what we live under today is has almost no connection to or reflects in almost no way the origins of the Constitution.
Right.
The idea that this new general government was going to have powers that Madison called few and defined, and that the states who created the new government, this general government, would retain all those powers that were, as he called them, numerous and indefinite. Well, that's kind of flipped on its head. I don't think anybody could argue that it exists that way. Right now we have ultimate authority over every aspect of our lives in the hands of a few hundred people, 1,000 miles away from Texans in a little town to our east that we're never going to know and can't really influence.
Right.
So when the light came on, you know the old adage, ignorance is bliss.
I do.
That's absolutely true, and there are days that I wish I had never opened the first document. And but once you start getting the truth, you can't let go of it.
Right. No, sorry, I didn't mean to cut you off, Dwayne. I'm
okay.
right there with you. I'm somewhat of a history junkie myself. I have been just absolutely enthralled with knowing everything and everything else that I can learn. You start to call it a rabbit hole is kind of an understatement.
It's a severe understatement,
right? Especially whenever you get into things that most people who just go through the regular history courses don't ever get into, like the ratification of the 14th Amendment, the push for the progressive agenda with the 17th, 18th, 16th, 17th, and 18th Amendments, the whole history behind the creation of the Federal Reserve, the first and second banks of the United States, all of that.
That's upper level.
Yeah.
We are 6 generations into a society that doesn't have the most basic understanding of the structure of the government. We have been taught for a century, and you talk about progressivism. Anybody that's listening to this needs to understand that really what we're dealing with today are the results of a century of progressivism. That's all we're dealing with. And if you don't think the right hasn't been impacted by progressive ideology, you're not paying attention.
Right.
Yeah. So when you strip it all away, you get down to guys like me. I'm just a layman. When you realize that we've been taught, our children are being taught, our parents were taught, our grandparents were taught these most stupid statements like this is a government of 3 co-equal branches. They were never co-equal branches, but we regurgitate that every day in every school across the United States.
Absolutely. Sorry, go ahead.
Go ahead.
I was going to say that one of the things that I was taught in my high school civics classes was that the purpose of the Supreme Court is to interpret the Constitution and interpret law. That's nowhere in Article 3 whatsoever.
No,
judicial review.
The two most dangerous misunderstandings that are pervasive throughout education, that are perpetuated throughout education in the United States, is one, that somehow they're all co-equal branches. The other one is that the Supreme Court of the United States is somehow superior to, it's the final arbiter of everything all the time everywhere across the entire United States. And those two items are the drivers of everything. They're the drivers of why we have so much elevated vitriol and animosity. They're the drivers of why everyone has homogenized themselves into this single identity, which is completely insane.
Mm-hmm.
That you have 330 million people across 50 sovereign states, and somehow we're supposed to all share the same identity. It's insane.
Well,
that's the only way I can describe it.
That's another thing. State sovereignty has gone the way of the dodo. Particularly, I want to say probably the final nail that really nailed it down for killing states' authority. States don't have rights; they have authority. Is the 17th Amendment and the popular election of senators.
Sure. That's definitely the 17th Amendment. The people that listen to your show may be clear on that. That's the amendment that removed a state legislature's power to choose their own representation in the Senate for the state and made them popularly elected, just like a member of the House.
Right.
And they don't teach you this in school. They didn't teach me this. They don't teach us in general. They still teach that we've got what the framers called a bicameral system, that you have a House that represents the people. That's why there's so many more members. And you have a Senate that supposedly represents the states. That's why it's fixed membership, 2 per state regardless. Delaware has the same representation as a state the size of Texas. But what happened with the 17th Amendment that they won't teach you is those 2 chambers, the bicameral system went away. It basically became one big body of 535 member parliament.
Right.
And the only difference between them is varying terms. They're all elected by popular vote. They all spend money from people we don't know on marketing campaigns to tell us they're just like us every few years, and they corner the market on all the rules and regulations for how you raise money and how you campaign and how you keep your office. And of course they're skewed to their favor, and they have all the control mechanisms in their favor. That's why I saw an article this morning talking about how we have a re-election rate of around 97% of the Congress, which is which is completely the opposite of the 13 to 14% approval rating they'll get on average.
Right.
So, my guy's okay because I've seen pictures of him with a cowboy hat standing next to somebody else's horse, and everybody else is bad. So I'm going to elect my guy back. Well, no, your guy's just as bad as everybody else. And
I'm sorry, Dwayne. I'm sorry to keep cutting you off. I really don't mean to.
No, jump in anytime.
What's really interesting is that the way that the government was originally structured, with the House being elected by districts comprised of a set population of the people in each state, and then the Senate being appointed by the state legislatures, it is so much easier to replace an incumbent whenever he only has to account to 30, 40,000, 50,000 people. When you're talking about a state
Yeah.
like Texas, trying to replace somebody that is elected statewide in a state with a population of 25 million like Texas, it is incredibly hard to do because not everybody is up to date on what that person's doing. The smaller the group of people responsible for electing that person, the easier it is to vote them out if they mess up, if they don't hold to their core values. And that's why the legislatures, and that's one of the reasons why the legislature was supposed to be in charge of who goes to the Senate, also because a state's interest is different from the interests of the people at large.
Well, to go off into the weeds a little bit about that, there's numerous little items you can get into. For those of us like myself, before I got into the structure of the government and the history of how we got here, I was a big believer in the old adage, the old notion, and it's a lie, by the way, but there's an old notion that the people are the term limits. We are the term limits. Well, that's not true. It can't be true these days. It's literally an impossibility. And the reason is scale. And that's everything that you're talking about. Most people don't get into the weeds, so they don't realize or don't have knowledge of. When the framers met in Philadelphia, they're taught that in school too. That somehow the framers got together in Philadelphia, and this great divinely inspired work came out of it with the sun's beaming and it's all wonderful, and this was this great moment of liberty. Well, that wasn't it at all. They actually got together. A few of them decided to do things they weren't given the authority to do. They went into chamber. They closed the doors. They locked out the media. They took a vow of silence. And some of the members said, yeah, we didn't get the authority to do this. We're going home. And they did.
Yeah.
And so you got this chamber full of people, and they talked George Washington into coming. They made him the chair. Now, back to what you were saying. They're in this meeting, which, by all accounts, you could say it had a bit of a nefarious start.
Yes.
This is it was nothing grandiose about it. They were there with intentions to do things that they didn't have the power to do. So they get there, they make George Washington the chair. He says almost nothing the whole time they're in Philadelphia. But when it comes to that ratio you're talking about, I don't remember if it's Section 2 or where it brings up the representation ratio is going to be around 30,000 citizens to the member of Congress. Well, he spoke about that, and he said he wanted a lower number, but they labored over it, and they came up with this number of 30,000. To your point, the entire purpose of that ratio had to do with the people being the term limits, for lack of better words. If you lived in a community of about 30,000 people, there's an extremely high likelihood you would know the person you were voting for personally.
Absolutely.
There was an exponentially higher likelihood that if you didn't know them, at least you would know someone that knew who they were, and you'd have some kind of context of character. Somebody would know something about their kids, their wife, their spouse, their parents, where they went to school, where they went to church. You'd see them at the grocery store, how the ethics of their personal character. You'd have all those items before you made a decision about them. Plus, if they were to behave corruptly in your community, you would know about it really quick, and you'd remove them quickly.
Absolutely.
Well, fast forward to today, and we're dealing with the progressive era, when the sitting Congress locked themselves in at 435 members. Now today we've got nearly 800,000 of us to a member of Congress, and there is literally no human way that you can know. Or first off, there's no way that one person can represent the best interests of 800,000 individuals.
No.
Second thing is, there's no way 800,000 individuals can know the personal character of an individual in that grouping. There's no way. And compound that with the fact that we elect this person we don't know, and they go 1,500 miles to our east, and we don't know who they break bread with. We don't know who buys them lunch. We don't know who they are influenced by, but we're pretty damn sure it's not us.
Right.
So this scale issue affects everything in our lives, all the way up and down the line. There is no way around it.
Right. No,
I just left my dog at home.
Yeah, I'm sorry. They've always been good until I have a show whenever there's a lot of people watching. So I have a question here from Gary and Beverly Malone. They're watching on Facebook, and they want to know, is Mr. Stovall another one that tells us one thing and then does another? How can you trust any politician?
You can't trust anybody that steps up here.
Right.
All I can tell you is I don't need any friends. I don't need any friends. I need more friends. I got plenty of friends. I don't need anybody outside the state of Texas to court me.
Right.
I have a deep historical knowledge of the proper role of U.S. Senator, which is the only reason I run for this office. There are mechanisms it can do to protect the best interests of Texas that no other office can do.
Right.
In a broad way. And it has a lot to do with messaging and discourse, what you can bring to the table. Other than that, really, you just have to look at the consistency of what I brought to the table for the last 6 or 7 years. There's no variation. There's no flipping around. I'm pretty straightforward about everything. Some people get very upset because I don't give them the answer they want. But
right.
Really, I'm more interested in finding Texans who are just basically over it. I want Texans who are ready for a much more aggressive approach to divesting power away from that federal. I don't want people here. I'll tell you this, and I've been sharing this for the last couple of weeks because it just kind of came over me in Llano. I was talking about 150 of my fellow Texans, and I mentioned to them, personally, I've gotten to a point where I'm over a lot of things, and one of the things I'm over are candidates who get up in front of me and my fellow Texans and say, I've been thinking about this a really long time, and I've been praying about it, and I've talked to my spouse, and I've talked to my kids. I've been asking God for guidance, and it's been weighing on me. It's really weighing on me, and I feel like it's on my heart, and I'm called to serve. And people applaud. Well, I'm at a point now with my understanding of this office and Congress and the relationship between the states and the federal and how it's supposed to operate. Now, that doesn't get it for me at all. When somebody does that and they kind of drop that, I've prayed about it and it's all good, and I want to do my duty. I raise my hand and I say, hey, that's wonderful. Now, what does that even mean? What does that mean? You're called to serve. Serve how? Serve who? What are you going to do? What's your modus operandi? What's your agenda? And if you have an agenda, share it with us and share what mechanism you're going to use to get that accomplished. And if you're just saying you're one of those guys that's more conservative than the other guy, I don't need you. What questions are you going to answer that I don't already have the answer to? So if you think you're just going to go there and because you're such a good person and you're so smart, you're going to grab that broken system and you're going to manipulate it in a better way. I don't need you.
So what are your let's say that instead of running for U.S. Senate, let's say you're running for Emperor of the United States. You have complete unchecked power to do literally anything you want to shape the fabric of our country from what it is right now to your ideal America. That I know that's really? that's not a question that you're typically asked, but what would Dwayne Stovall's ideal America look like?
It would look like a 50-member military leadership role with 50 different branches. And it would be a 50-member trade commission with members from every state. And the federal government wouldn't even exist.
Wow. That's pretty bold.
I'm sorry.
No.
That government is so beyond its capacity as a constitutionally limited government. We live today. You asked me a question to kind of give a broad, never going to happen question. I'm
Right.
going to tell you something that's a factual statement. That Constitution doesn't exist anymore.
Absolutely.
We live in the United States, singular, of America. Get that through. Everybody that ever hears this. You live in the United States of America. When you say your country, you're referring to the entire union. When you say us, you're referring to people in Connecticut with you. We live, me and my fellow Texans live in the county of Texas. And we've got people that live over in the county of California and the people up in the county of New York. And we are so down this progressive rat hole of identity, of collective identity, that somehow when we get up in the morning and the people over in the county of New York are doing something we don't like, we just point over to our overlords over in D.C. and go, hey, get over there and do something with them. And this is all adverse, all polar opposite to what was the founding was. And the idea that we would have this supposedly limited general government that would kind of have a little bit of authority over foreign trade and have a lot more ability to protect our interests militarily and have a few ideas about monetary aspects over the states as far as commerce, minimal commerce, and minimal regulatory means like bankruptcies and things. But other than that, it's not supposed to be there. If the federal government operated properly, we wouldn't even know it existed.
Mm-hmm. No, I know.
It'd be like air. You'd only know it existed if you needed it and it wasn't there.
Right. That's very reminiscent of what Rand Paul said during the presidential debates. He said, I want the federal government so small I can barely see it, which I think is probably one of the best quotes I heard during that entire campaign season. Now, you're running for U.S. Senate against John Cornyn, who has been in a thorn in the side of Texas, and a lot of Texans don't even know it. What would Senator Stovall do differently than Senator Cornyn? Obviously, there's going to be a big difference, but what would be some of the very noticeable things that Senator Stovall would do differently?
Oh, it'd be noticeable from day one. I'd shut down every field office he had in the state of Texas and call the lieutenant governor and tell him to find me a closet or an unused office in the state capitol. I'd put one representative there.
That's pretty good.
Because the predominant primary focus of that office is to do one thing, and that's protect the best interests of the state of Texas.
Yeah.
So the idea that you're going to perpetuate this ridiculous notion that if I have 8 or 9 offices across Texas, somehow 30 million Texans have access to me. 30 million Texans have access to me. That's ridiculous. And people know they don't. I mean, they call their offices just to kind of get something off their chest, you know.
Right.
And they're done. You can get your form letter back. You can call and talk to somebody, or you can call and get an answer machine like you with John Cornyn a lot of the time. But if you truly want to have influence over that office, we're going to have to change the dynamic. I was in Fort Worth a few months back, and I asked a group of about 200 people. The lady asked that question, but she asked it differently. It was that kind of general, so what makes you different? And I told them that I would upset them much faster than he would. and some of them laughed, and she said, I don't get it. And I said, I'd shut down every field office he had. And she said, you can't do that. We have to be able to communicate with you. And I said, wonderful. How's that working out for you?
Wow.
So I said, everybody in the room, show of hands. How many of you made a phone call to one of the field offices for John Cornyn and spoke to John Cornyn? Well, of course, none of you are going to raise your hand because they won't. How many of you ever called and got a hold of someone and it led to anything legitimize will you talk to John Cornyn or anything like that. No one raised their hand. I said, well, okay, I'm going to flip that. How many of you in this room have ever spoken to personally about business, not about passing in a donor meeting where you shake hands and get a picture? Now I'm talking about that. How many of you ever spoken to your House representative? Well, they all raised their hands. I said, that's right. I said, how many of you know where their office is? They all raise their hands. How many of you can call up there and talk to someone and know you're going to get a call back from a human being, and maybe you get a chance to go in and schedule a meeting with them? They'll all raise their hands. I said, that's how this works. That's your representation. My job would be to represent the best interest of that pink dome in Austin, as long as it was constitutional and in the best interest of Texas. So the way this works is that I would go office in the Capitol. I'd call a meeting of the body of the whole, get both chambers in there. I'd tell all 182 members you're on notice. I have you on speed dial. I have you on basically an old school Rolodex and an email list and a text list. And I'm going to keep you informed of what's going on that affects Texas. And you're going to give your input, because you can put 180 people in one room.
Yep.
So and I'm going to guide all of my fellow Texans that if they have a problem with good, bad, or ugly, indifferent, doesn't matter, they want to get messaging through to me, they're going to call you. And if I get 20 calls from you guys, I already know there's something, we got to bring that to the surface. Whatever that is, we need to deal with that. This is how it puts every single Texan 1 degree away from my office. That's the communication pecking order and how it's supposed to work, not how it works today, which is they're basically rogue individuals. They just do whatever it is they feel like. And it's not a hard concept to grasp. I said that to about 200 people. They totally got it by the time I left there.
So Paul asks, sorry, go ahead.
I was going to say, if you want to know the mechanics of what I would do in office, that's along the same lines, but there's one question that I don't think Texans or anybody in any other state have ever been able to get the answer to that secures it in their bone marrow. I think we all kind of walk around with a little bit of hope that the federal government is somehow going to give up some of its authority, stop encroaching on our lives, stop leaning on our states, start allowing states to live according to the will of their citizens. Mm-hmm. And we kind of hold out hope that there's going to be, we're going to elect enough R's and that we're going to get it going that direction. Well, my goal is to answer that question in the first 30 days I'm in office. And I'm going to do that using the most divisive issue in our society today.
And what's that?
And that's abortion. I'm going to do that with abortion. There is no authority in the federal Constitution for the federal government to be involved in the issue of abortion. There is no authority for them to take our money and to fund the murder of children through an organization that sells their body parts after they kill them. There's no authority for them to mandate, dictate, or require the citizens in all 50 states to allow legalized murder of children. There is no authority in that document. So I'm going to go to 99 other offices, and I'm going to pose the question the correct way through the authority that Article 3 gives us. And I'm going to say, hey, look, I'm going to offer a one-line piece of legislation, and I know some people will laugh at that because that never happens. But I'm going to offer a one-line piece of legislation, and it's going to say, as of today, we remand the issue of abortion back to the states, and we're going to remove any and all perceived jurisdiction from the federal judiciary over the issue. And I'm going to go to people like Bernie Sanders, and I'm going to say, Bernie, you're going to support this bill because I'm going to get you elected for the rest of your life in Vermont, because you're going to go back to Vermont and you're going to tell your fellow citizens that you support this bill because you want the citizens of Vermont to manage this issue according to their will. And you want to make sure that nobody that looks like this Texan has any influence over how they manage this issue.
Right.
And I'm going to go back to Texas, and I'm going to have an answer for my legislature. And I'm going to call them back together as soon as I've hit the 99th office. And I'm going to answer that question permanently and finally for my fellow Texans. I'm going to have two answers, one or the other. I'm going to say, folks, there's light at the end of the tunnel, and we have a simple majority of the Senate who are willing to give up some authority that they know they don't have the right to take, and some force that they use on the states that they don't have the right to enforce. Or, and it's more likely, and I hate to say that, but it's more likely I'm going to come back and say, okay, I have proof beyond a shadow of a doubt. This is what I did. This is functionally how I did it. These are the answers I received, and I have proven beyond a shadow of a doubt that there is not a single person in the federal government that's willing to give up 1 ounce of authority that they've taken over the last 100 years, and that they are never going to take the boot off the throat of Texans or the citizens in any other state. Now, what do you want me to do?
Wow.
I'm going to drop it on them.
That is an approach that I have never heard of, and that is definitely something that I personally I really like that approach. That's not something that is normally stated. So Paul asked, "Are you going to actually listen and vote the way the people listen and vote the way the people that vote for you are what you think should be done, or are you going to do what we the people want and not the politician wants?"
Well, that's a broad scope. There's 30 million people in the state right at 30 million people in the state of Texas. We got over 16 million registered voters. I'm not going to answer to the will of every single individual voter. The purpose of this office is to do the will in the best interest of the state of Texas. There's a pecking order. When you look at a proposed bill, first, does it meet the criteria of the U.S. Constitution, which most of them don't, just letting you know. The second thing is, which most people leave out of the equation, if it meets the first criteria, which is the federal Constitution, does it meet the criteria of the Texas Constitution? Most people kick that out of the sequence. But, folks, we have a Constitution, we have a Bill of Rights, they're both meaningful. Once it gets beyond that, you look at one singularly overriding issue, and that is, does it benefit or hurt the state of Texas? If the state legislature is behind it and it meets all the criteria and it does not do harm to the state of Texas, it's a go.
Right.
If it does harm to the state of Texas, but it helps out 49 other states, it's a negative.
Yeah.
If the state legislature is asking me to do something that does not meet criteria 1 or 2, then we got a whole discussion to have if it doesn't meet the criteria of number 3, but it should. There's no way that a liberal, progressive-leaning state legislature would ever get me to go along with something that violated 1 or 2. And it would be very hard to see anything violating 1 or 2 that violated 3. So is there a chance that it could put you at odds with your legislature? Possibly, but much of what this office brings to the table is the ability to articulate a discussion with Texans that they don't get.
Absolutely.
And if you have the ear, I'll put it to you this way: Professor Donald Livingston told me that if you really want a society to change their path or their status in life, you have to agitate them to their feet in mass. And the key factor in that formula is mass. It's not agitating to their feet. We are all, people that are listening to you now, we all go to meetings for different groups, and we're all agitated to our feet in groups of 20 or 40 or whatever. But that's not mass. When you have the ability to message 1 million, 2 million, 5 million Texans at once, and you can get the ear of truly liberty-minded, small government-minded, historically known independent thinking Texians, Tejanos, Hispanic Texans here, and get them to understand we're kind of all in this together, and the target is really not each of us. The target is the federal government and their encroachment on our lives. Because a U.S. senator is not there to dictate. They're not there to force you to be involved in anything you don't want to be involved in. They're literally looking after the best interests of the state. So the idea that we're not going to have disagreements in Texas, that's a misnomer too. That's going to happen. But the larger question, anybody that's ever followed my campaign understands that my question to Texans is, who gets to manage Texas? And it's the larger issue of the discussion and the arguments. Outside of those limited authorities that the federal government is supposed to hold, who gets to manage Texas? Is it going to be among ourselves, we Texans kind of having this discourse and making decisions among ourselves, or are we simply going to abdicate that over to some people who are non-Texan 1,000 miles to our east and just say, okay, we'll just rule over us, because that's where we're at now. Right. And if you believe in limited government, even in the slightest way, even if you're just a common sense oriented person, you know that it's better for us to manage our affairs here among ourselves than it is to let people we don't know out of our eyesight manage our affairs. So it's a really simple construct. That's why my campaign will do so well in November, because it's a bipartisan question.
Right.
I don't care where you're on the political spectrum. You are just dense if you think you want people you don't know thousands of miles away from you to rule over your life. Right. I don't even know what to do for you.
So
when you get to that point.
So here's an interesting question, also from Paul. You were talking about how the Constitution doesn't allow for the federal government to be involved in the issue of abortion in any way. And whenever it comes to a lot of conservatives, they really kind of hammer that home a lot, but then they kind of ignore it whenever it comes to another issue, whenever it comes to foreign aid. And Paul he basically makes a statement, there's nothing in the Constitution saying that we support other countries either. So how would Senator Stovall address things such as foreign aid and spending, or I guess investing, quote unquote, in foreign countries, or
don't use the word investing.
That was in quotes. That was in quotes.
We all know what it is. It's payola.
Right.
It's worse than payola, because it's like me taking your money out of your wallet with a gun to your head and then turn around going to somebody I don't know and saying, here, do what I want. I'm going to use your money to do it. Look, the idea of foreign subsidy of any kind is completely illegal. We all know this. We ask ourselves over breakfast across the entire union every day, why do we give our money to these Middle Eastern countries? Why do we give our money to these foreign countries all over the globe? They're buying favor. They're buying control. This has a lot to do with our global presence as the world's police. You know, if we can't put a gun to their head and tell them this is what you're going to do because we want you to, then we're going to pay them off and get them to make decisions. We'll pay out. We've proven beyond a shadow of a doubt we're willing to take taxpayer-funded money, dollars, right out of your pocket and go over and literally give it to terrorists in their hands one at a time at a table in Afghanistan to lower the level of violence. Just don't shoot at us for a while, and we're going to give you thousands of dollars each so that you guys can go party, and we'll start fighting with you again next month. So, this is where we're at. The idea that we're going to subsidize these other countries is ridiculous.
Right, and usually whenever conservatives are asked that, they bring up countries like Iran.
It's all tied to Israel.
Right, and so how do you address
well, they always leave out one little fact.
What's that?
One little data point, and that is that we give exponentially more money to the countries around Israel that want to do Israel harm than we give to Israel.
That's true. Now,
so there's no sanity involved in that either. Good Lord, if we're Israel's ally, what does that make us?
Right.
Israel's got the biggest, baddest military on the planet over there, and we help them with that. They purchase from us. We're in a allied agreement with them, or an allied relationship with them, where we share technology and different things. They don't need our help. Historically, if they were going to protect themselves in the late 80s, we condemned them for wanting to defend themselves. It's like we just want to keep them under our thumb.
Mm-hmm.
So my idea is it's not about whether or not you support Israel. It's whether or not you have a legal process or a legal right to take the money of U.S. citizens and give it to any country. Any country. Israel, its enemies, any country around planet Earth, they don't have that authority.
Amen.
They just don't have it.
Amen. And that's a tough question to really ask, and even a tougher one to answer. But when somebody's intellectually honest about all of their positions, it becomes far less difficult to answer.
Oh yeah.
I'm somebody.
Honesty sells, brother.
Absolutely. I'm a Jew, but I'm also somebody that is very libertarian minded, if you will. And whenever it comes to giving other people or other countries money, I don't understand or agree with the forcible taking of property from American citizens in order to redistribute it to a company, to another person, or to another country. To me, that is the very epitome of theft, and it's a money laundering scheme.
Well, we can go boss you out all day if you
want. Okay, so let's get to the Second Amendment. We're a gun rights organization, and I know that you have an event here coming up, so I want to get your take on gun rights, gun ownership, the current laws at the federal level, and all of that. How do you feel about the current state of the Second Amendment of the U.S. Constitution?
I think as a society we're kind of stuck on stupid when it comes to the Second Amendment. We are allowing the federal government to encroach on our right to bear arms in ways, and we're allowing them to encroach. Let's stop right there. They have no authority, zero, none, to be involved in your right to bear arms. Not an ounce. When it says thou shalt not infringe, that word was chosen for a reason. It's the broadest possible term you can use. It doesn't have to do with the militia. It doesn't have to do with it. It's a broad term, meaning you're not to have a hearing about it. You're not to speak about it. You're not to have a committee about it. You're not to convene any kind of anything. You don't have any involvement in this at all. That's a prior existing right. It's none of your business. But we have been sold down the valley here. We're down the pipeline where we have all these federal regulatory means on gun ownership, sales, you name it, and none of it is legal. Not 1 ounce of it. So the article that you guys put out yesterday or the day before about John Cornyn doesn't have a principled thought one way or another on anything. And when it comes to the Second Amendment, he's totally open to negotiation and always has been. That's what's kind of amazing. Anything that's ever happened of substance during his tenure, you can go back to Virginia when the shooting happened in Virginia. And come forward. You can go use Sutherland or you can use El Paso. He was all about expanding encroachment on your right to bear arms way back there. This fixed Nick stuff and coming forward with his Response Act or whatever it is. These are politically motivated warm and fuzzies. This is a look at me. I'm worried about it. I care about you.
Right.
And I'm trying to fix this. Well, the reality of it is he doesn't give a rip about anybody except himself. And he doesn't know the foggiest thing about the constitutional construct. He believes that he has the simple authority to rule over 330 million citizens across 50 sovereign states on how, or when, or where they buy a gun or when they own it. And if that doesn't bring your blood to a boil, I don't know what else will. I just don't.
Well, that definitely lights a fire under me.
They need to be rejected at every possible statement. When they open their mouth up and say, oh, well, guns, no, be quiet. The bearing of arms, no, be quiet. That's outside of your purview. That's none of your business. So it's a very short discussion with me. I'd like to see any of that regulatory means that's been put in place over the years be rejected completely. I've been against the national ID and national registries as long as I can remember. And back when I didn't even understand the constructs of the government, it just felt wrong. I didn't need people I didn't know keeping a record on me. And I get into it sometimes with people who are, because I've been in construction for so many years. I get the use of like what's the instrument we use for checking their social security numbers, make sure they're valid citizens.
Oh, E-Verify?
Oh, E-Verify. And I get into it with people because I would be totally open to a T-Verify, meaning a Texas E-Verify, to put a buffer between Texas and the federal government so that we could call someone in Texas, they could do a blind search on who we're hiring, and then we could bring these employers to bear here in Texas without involving us in some kind of national unconstitutional program. Guns are the same way. I don't need the federal government being involved in anything that has to do with me owning a gun ever. And you can see now the handwriting's on the wall. They're trying to get down to just me and you trading guns as neighbors.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I mean, Dan Patrick's been pushing that since El Paso and Odessa I think that what he's going to ultimately be pushing is that you have to have an LTC to engage in private sales, and ultimately that's just another one more infringement on the books that of the copious 20,000, 30,000 across every state and at the federal level as well.
It will always be by slow bake. They're always going to take it incrementally, and each generation is going to pass, and they're going to wake up a little more acceptance of a little more encroachment until they're going to wake up one day and have a Supreme Court that rules that banning guns nationally is perfectly legal. It's constitutional.
On that note, a lot of people that are pro-gun, they like to cite the Heller decision. And if you actually read the Heller decision, Scalia wrote some very awful things. There's another case called United States v. Miller from 1938, I believe, where a guy was criminally charged for and convicted for possessing sawed-off shotguns and violating the National Firearms Act. And Scalia quoted a piece of the decision from that basically the ruling for Miller and justification for that was, a sawed-off shotgun is not a military weapon, therefore it's not protected by the Second Amendment. And Scalia took that and said, you can't read it that way, because if you did, then that would make banning fully automatic weapons unconstitutional. So we can't read it that way. That's in the Heller opinion that Scalia wrote.
There's two things you need to know about that. The first is, as much as I like some of the things Scalia did, Scalia was not an originalist. Scalia was a textualist. I believe he coined that phrase, as a matter of fact. So that takes him away from the understanding or having to show a proof of understanding of the document, as Jefferson would call, as the friends of the document agreed to it.
Mm-hmm.
He's a textualist, so he would take individual words. He went on the Sunday, you can find this on YouTube. If you look at Scalia on his idea about Second Amendment and bearing of arms, Scalia literally said that, it says the bearing of arms, so it really only pertains to anything you can hold in your hand. So, we're going to have to rule on that at some point. He said that. And I saw that. I went, oh, you've got to be kidding me that you're even talking about this. But as far as the Heller case goes, there's a very specific finality to Heller that makes it totally constitutional and it makes it legitimate. And that is in the District of Columbia.
Yeah.
So any and all jurisdiction over that 10-mile square in the Constitution, which is detailed, it's there for you to read in the Constitution. They have all authority over that, all of it. So they can rule any way they want there. What people lose track of is that any ruling they had in Heller did not extend to any state. It was Heller. It was inside D.C. It belonged to them. They owned it. There was no application or extended interpretation of that ruling to apply to the states in any way. I think a more the one thing that probably gets people more riled up than anything, especially if you have those of us, and I was this way until about 15 years ago. So I try to see it their way and kind of bring them around the corner. It took me many years to grasp this. It's very hard for people to understand that when a state writes a law that infringes on someone's right to bear arms, that somehow they are infringing on the Second Amendment. And a lot of people they'll go back to a most recent ruling back in 2012 or 11, which was the McDonald case. You guys have looked at the McDonald case, right?
Mm-hmm.
Well, that was for those that don't know, that was a private case. It was an older black gentleman in Chicago named Oscar McDonald. He wanted to have a pistol in his home for security. That was basically it. The people of Chicago had voted to ban guns. He didn't agree. It ended up getting litigated, and it went through the Illinois judicial system all the way up to the Supreme Court. And the Supreme Court of Illinois ruled, and they said, Mr. McDonald, we're sorry, but the people of Chicago have spoken, and they don't want to have guns. So if you want a gun, you're going to have to move to an area where they allow it, or you're going to have to move to Texas or Oklahoma or whatever. And you know what happened? Every conservative, liberty-oriented, guns right organization in the United States raised up in arms or screaming about it, and they got involved, and they pushed it out of the Illinois judicial system, and they pushed into the federal. And the federal government, of course, the federal judges didn't say, oh, that's about guns. Oh, I'm sorry, we're restricted from having anything to do with that. They said, well, what's it about? Oh, we don't really care. We'll take it up. And they took it up, of course, because they take up everything. So what happened? In 2011 or 12 or so, maybe 2010, it's been recent, relatively recent, federal judges ruled. And they came out and said, no, because of what you said earlier, the 14th Amendment and a misapplication of that. The 14th Amendment says that we can apply the Federal Bill of Rights to the states, and we've got the authority to do so, so Mr. McDonald can keep his gun because the Second Amendment protects his rights. So what happened? Every gun group in the United States, every conservative group who are Second Amendment folks said, fantastic, that protects our rights. That's Second Amendment, yay, Second Amendment. What they didn't grasp is that that's the perfect vehicle. 20 years from now, because we live under stare decisis, folks, we live under case precedent. We don't live under the Constitution. You live under a body of judges' rulings. Get that through your head. So 20 years from now, there's going to be a piece of legislation brought. They're going to say, we need to ban guns nationally. And our grandkids are going to get up and say, you can't do that. The Second Amendment. And they're going to go, oh, no, we've got the authority to do that. Remember McDonald's? Your grandparents gave us that authority.
Yeah.
And that's what's going to happen. And everybody's going to be dumbfounded. No, the Second Amendment. No. We've got control over that right. Remember?
Mm-hmm.
And people are scared to death of that. And it's almost this contradiction that you really have to sit people down and go, look, the Second Amendment is not your ultimate authority. You are responsible for you. It's a piece of paper.
Mm-hmm.
And if you give that authority over to 9 unelected, well-connected lawyers to protect that right that you have by whether you're a believer like me and you believe that you have that right through your creator, or whether you're an atheist and you believe you have the right to self-defense in any way you see fit through your humanity and the fact that you exist, it doesn't matter. It's the same finish line. If you think that you're going to give the authority to protect that right to 9 unelected, well-connected judges, then we're lost.
Yeah. We're
lost.
You know, one of my favorite quotes it comes from Thomas Jefferson, and I am absolutely obsessed with Jefferson. I consider him my spirit animal. But he wrote a letter to William Jarvis in, I want to say 1828. But they were talking about the Supreme Court, and this, you know, keep in mind, this is after Marbury in 1803. And right. Jefferson said, and this is almost a verbatim quote, he said, to consider the judges the ultimate arbiters of all constitutional questions is a very dangerous doctrine indeed, and one that will place us under the despotism of an oligarchy. And that's exactly what we have now. Like, exactly.
Hey, who was his arch nemesis?
Well, at what point? Because he and Adams went at it for quite some time.
Adams, go back to the folks on the other side of the fence from him, like Hamilton.
Oh, Hamilton. Golly. I loathe Hamilton.
What did Hamilton say about the Supreme Court? And he's the big government guy.
Yeah.
The lefties love him. He said any layman's reading of the document will show Constitution will show that the Supreme Court was the weakest of all the branches because they had no mechanism of self-defense and no mechanism of enforcement. And he went on to say, but if at any time the Supreme Court, the judicial branch, ever coalesces with either the legislative or the executive or both, everyone's liberty would be in danger.
Mm-hmm.
Buddy, that's where we're at.
Yeah. So, a little bit of what you were talking about earlier. James has a little bit of criticism for you, and I think that you can kind of clarify what your stance is on this. He says, despite the 10th Amendment referencing constitutional prohibitions to the states, Stovall believes that only the federal government is restrained by the Second Amendment. He believes that the states are not restrained by it. He believes arms infringements at the state level are not unconstitutional. Just ask him, he'll tell you.
He's right, but he's not. But it's not me.
Mm-hmm.
That's Madison. That's Madison, Mason, Randolph. That's every state delegation that agreed to the Bill of Rights amendments. He's not. I'm not disagreeing with him. I'm just agreeing with them.
Yeah.
What he's referring to is a modern interpretation of progressive judges who decided arbitrarily out of thin air that somehow back to your 14th Amendment reference, somehow magically the 14th Amendment meant things that it had never meant in a half century prior, and they could use it to apply the Federal Bill of Rights to the states. If you believe that the Federal Bill of Rights supersedes everything in the states, then we just need to take the state constitutions and all 50 state bills of rights and throw them in the trash can and give the keys to our state capitals to the federal government. If you believe that every single state in this union is completely restricted by limitations that were placed on the federal government by the states at their request, and if you read the preamble to the Federal Bill of Rights, it will tell you, the Congress says, hey folks, we know you had desires to put further constraints on this new government, and look what we did. We did it. Further constraints or misconstructions or abuses of its institution. They're talking about the federal government. They're not talking about the states. Now look at Texas. We have Article 23 in our Section 23 in Article 1 of our Bill of Rights.
Mm-hmm.
What does it say? It says that we have the right to bear arms, and we're going to protect that. What is the last thing in there?
But the legislature has the authority.
The state has the right. That's right. The state reserves the right to regulate the wearing of those arms with a view toward safety. Well, guess what? I don't care what it says after a right to regulate. They got the right to regulate. We've been trying to get that language stripped from our state constitution for many years. So
now
I don't want to bust anybody's bubble, but if you believe in divested authority, you better get off the wagon of trying to get the federal government to protect your right to bear arms, because they're not going to do it. And if you think government moves right at any point in time in history, that it doesn't consistently move left, you're not paying attention.
Now, you saying that doesn't mean that you support any gun control at the state level, right?
I just said I've been trying to get them to strip that language out of our state constitution for about a decade now.
Okay, all right.
I don't. Now look. Here's what you need to understand: got to learn, and I had to do this myself. People have got to learn to not mix philosophical ideals that we would all totally agree with the physical, literal construct of the constitutional government we live under and where the pecking order is.
Right.
They don't have the authority to take your money and charge them with it, but to do it.
Right. Okay.
And it's like we consistently ask them to do more and more, but they don't have the authority to do it, as if someday they're going to wake up and protect your rights. They're not going to do that.
No. Government government at its finest is inept, and they are also incredibly corrupt, and every government will be corrupt. And a lot of people misunderstand that do understand this about Jefferson. They misunderstand what he meant by it. But Jefferson said that the Constitution should be thrown out every 19 years, every generation, because the new generation is being forced into a form of government that they didn't agree to. Now, when he says the Constitution, he's not talking about the Bill of Rights from a philosophical standpoint. He still believes in natural right. He still believes in Lockean principles. He believes that those rights should always be there. In fact, that was his biggest criticism of the Constitution when he was in France in 1787, was that it lacked a Bill of Rights.
Well, the idea that you're going to have an open discussion and dialogue on how best to manage these rights among yourselves was kind of his key centerpiece. Limited government is limited government, and it has to do with what's closest to you.
Mm-hmm.
And this notion, and people don't like to hear this because truth is not very warm and fuzzy, folks. It's usually pretty painful. But the fact of the matter is, you cannot believe in limited government and then also believe that the Supreme Court should rule over things that it shouldn't rule over, including your guns. They don't work together. What you are suffering from, same thing I suffered from, is this modern progressive collective identity crisis, which is we're all Americans, we're all in this United States, it's our country, we have one guiding principle, that we have one guiding Supreme Court. They are the Supreme Court arbiter of everything all the time everywhere, and the states are just, subordinate administrators of the federal will. And until you let go of that, and you start backing up and realizing, folks, we've got 30 million people in the state of Texas. That's 11 times more people than were in all 13 states combined when they ratified the Constitution. That's almost as many people as were in the entire United States when they fought the Civil War. If you think that we're all Americans and you share the same identity as someone from Connecticut, I got news for you. We're in Texas. We have exponentially more in common with the people of Mexico, culturally, historically, logistically, traditionally, than we ever will with the people of Vermont or Maine. Or it's just historical fact.
Mm-hmm.
So stop trying to grow the government under the guise of protecting liberty. It doesn't work. One side is philosophical, the other side is anti-liberty.
Absolutely.
So it's a tough one, but when you get people to really back up and grab some logic and common sense and try to push back against what they've been saturated with from birth, that you're in this free country and you're represented and you've got this national government, the federal government. It's not federal anymore, it's national, and it rules over every ounce of your life. But, there are rulers and they get to dictate over how we're going to manage these issues. No, if the people in New York want to pass laws, look, I'll put it to you this way. If the people of New York want to elect their representation to go to their state capital and write laws for them that so much as ban guns and only criminals can have them, good luck with that. But don't do that here in Texas. If the people of Connecticut want to write laws that say Adam can marry Steve, good luck with that. I don't care. I'm a Texan. You're a citizen of New York. You're a New Yorker. I want to respect your will to live your life according to your means. I don't need you trying to influence me down here.
Right.
Right now we live in a society that's literally trying to elect a king. They're looking for the king that's going to give them the judge that's going to fix all their ills.
Yep.
And they're really, it's just a huge paradigm of team effort that we just want to elect enough of our guys into offices of that tyrannical government so that we can force all 330 million people to live according to our will.
Tyranny is still tyranny if you agree with it.
That's not freedom, man.
Yeah.
That's not freedom. And this office I run for is a key component to changing the discourse level and getting people to kind of strip away this nonsense we've been fed for 6 generations now.
Yeah.
I think it can happen. I really do. Otherwise, I wouldn't be running for it.
Well, we've been going for over an hour here, Dwayne, and I really, really am grateful for your time. Is there anything else that you would like to leave everybody with before we wrap this up?
Yeah, a couple of things. One is I learned a lot about this race back in 2013 about how large it is and the power structure that you're running against. I want you to understand something. I walked away from there thinking that it was massive and that they controlled everything, but this time it's totally different. I see the extent to which messaging is controlled by the establishment in both parties. If you went back 2 years and looked at headlines of John Cornyn, they would be all anti-Trump. It would be him speaking out against Trump, him speaking out against the wall, him speaking out against everything about the man. You can't find, it's concerted effort. You can't find those old articles hardly at all. And you can't find anything but a headline that says, he is Donald Trump's most ardent supporter. You can hardly go back and find anything about him being on Tucker Carlson saying Texas said they don't want a wall or anything like that. All of this marketing, the way they push society around, is very disturbing. I mean, it's just really disturbing. They have got such a great mechanism through messaging, the way they control the marketing. And most of us are just trying to go to work, make a living, take care of their kids, and they don't want their heads stuck in this political ESPN for politics we have every day. So the messaging is so very important, and they control it, the vast majority of it. Of course, he's got $11 million in the bank. They come from his vested interest.
Right.
We're never going to raise that kind of money. But as you said earlier, you'd never heard anything like this before, but you get it. It sticks. That's all I can tell you. It really does. And we bank on that. That's how a guy like me steps out from behind his kitchen table and pulls almost 11% of a primary in Texas. It's because, it's the truth. It's millions and millions of dollars to make a mule look like Secretariat. But if anybody's interested in what I'm doing, if you've got any money at all that you can cut loose of, we'll take it. I was the worst possible fundraiser in 2013 because it's so dirty. But the fact of the matter is we got to have it. And if we don't have it, we're in trouble. We don't need all of it. We need some of it. It doesn't take nearly as much money to do what I'm doing. But if you can do that, that'd be great. If you can't, go to puttingtexasfirst.com. Create a profile, jump on the wagon. We've got about 1,400 volunteers. We'll probably have 2,000 by Thanksgiving. It's just a really great organic movement. But you can go to DwayneStovall.com, DWAYNESTOVALL, and follow some more. If you have any questions, email us. Most of it comes directly to me. I don't have any problems corresponding with everybody. It gets a little tougher every day, but I try. It's just, it's all about Texas, man. If we don't start putting Texas first, we're dead in the water.
Absolutely. So you want to know how? Here is evidence of just how organic you are. James, the guy that offered that criticism earlier that you clarified, he says, while I disagree with his stance on the Second Amendment with regard to the states, I have to say that Stovall is consistent and unafraid to say exactly what he believes and then explain exactly why he believes it. I'll vote for him. So. I've seen a couple of comments rolling through of people that have whose vote you have earned just being here. So
I appreciate that. Tell them to take a stiff upper lip when somebody starts mouthing off that doesn't know the background behind anything. Because there's a lot of people that want to twist messaging around and say I'm perfectly fine for gun restrictions in New York or something. Well, I'm not going to New York. I don't really care. Oh, hey, by the way, I don't know if you guys get into the federal, they've been pushing federal reciprocity for years.
We've been opposed to that. Yeah, we've been opposed to that because it's like it defines so much that it is just sweeping gun control whenever Democrats take over everything.
That gives them national power on every aspect of your guns.
Everything. Like they could seriously nullify a state's carry license and make it to where only a federal license is what's authorized to carry. And
it's the creep. It's the creep back into a national registry of a particular gun to a particular individual with a particular style of permit down to a you can't have it, and we'll restrict it down to the point where we're going to ban them, and it's legal. And by the way, if anybody ever asks, the Supreme Court of the United States has but one obligation today, one job, and their job is to give legitimacy and constitutionality to completely illegitimate and unconstitutional acts by the federal government. That's their job. So at some point in time, we got to get somebody in office that understands how to push back against them.
Absolutely. And Dwayne, I'm so grateful that you came on here to speak, and best of luck to you in the election. I will do my best to try and get people your way as well. And
hey, thanks a lot.
If you ever want to come back on, even after the elections, win, lose, draw, whatever, you will constantly have an open invitation anytime. All you got to do is let me know, and we'll make it happen.
Thanks a lot, Derek. Everybody just go out there and tell everybody you can, and stay vigilant.
All righty.
I appreciate it, Derek.
Thank you, Dwayne.
Bye-bye.
Bye. All righty, guys. That's going to do it for me. Thank you so much for everything. This was a great show. It really was. Dwayne is a great guy, and, we don't endorse anybody here, but he's definitely one to take a look at. I'll leave it at that. Anyway, guys, we are, if you guys can, join LSGR, $6 a month, $60 for the year, and help us restore our rights. Until next Sunday, arm yourself with knowledge and share the ammo. Thanks, guys.